This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. Not horrible. I'm not sick or anything, so that's
good, right?
It's always positive.
Yeah, awesome.
I got my coffee with my Coffee with Kelly mug.
I got my non-coffee with Kelly mug. That's coffee mug that my lovely daughter bought me for Christmas, I think, one year. It's been a few years, but
I think it's a ceramic one, right? Looks like it.
Stone.
Stone.
I think they call it stone. But
wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Looks like one of those ones where when you first pour the coffee in there and it's real scalding hot, you can still like touch the outside and not have your hands like burn.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the nice part of like stone or pottery.
I like it. It meets my grumpy persona.
T-Rexes are grumpy.
They are.
I thought they were just hungry.
Nope, they're grumpy. they're hangry. They're hangry. What do we got today?
So we're going to talk about creating a supportive school environment and, how school safety is infused in doing that. So I guess I'll start with the news article.
Before we do that.
Okay.
Let me ask you, when we start saying supportive environment,
mm-hmm.
What do you think is the impetus for doing that?
To give students the best chance possible to learn in a safe environment?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's trying to get a safe environment, right? And it's trying to create an environment where there is no harm done. Right? So, and the reason I want to set that tone first is because I think our little article is going to challenge that a bit. I think this is really when we provide a safe, secure environment with positive outcomes and you create this positive environment. I think it's meant to be so that there is no harm, right? When they come to school, there's no harm done to them. Let's use that as the basis for this conversation in this podcast, because I think we're going to challenge that a little bit.
Yeah. Do you want me to do the article now?
Sure.
Am I allowed?
This is your podcast. I just
said that before, but my name's not on here, so
this is your world. I just exist in it, Ethan.
And it's like whenever you decide to stop, it's like I'm gonna have to like just dismantle this whole thing and rename it. And
well, I think we already have that name, right?
Yeah, I mean, but no one's gonna want to just listen to me.
Espresso with Ethan.
Yeah. It'd be a much shorter podcast, that's for sure.
We'll see.
Oh man.
Maybe by then you will be me.
I will replace you. Never. You're irreplaceable, Kelly.
That's not true. Everyone's replaceable.
Talking about a positive environment, Kelly.
Right.
All right, so I'm just going to read the headline, maybe a little bit of what's in the article. So the headline is, Texas lawmaker proposes bill targeting furries. Measure seeks to ban non-human behavior in schools. I bring this up because it says something about, behavior. So it's obviously something we hit on quite frequently. So this lawmaker has introduced a bill to ban non-human behavior in public schools, such as barking, meowing, and other animal-like practices commonly used by furries.
So explain to our audience what a furry is.
When someone dresses up as an animal and pretends to identify as an animal.
As an animal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is just a continuation / extension of identifying as something that you weren't originally. We'll leave it at that, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get too political here. When we seek to ban anything in a school, generally it's because it's having a negative effect on school population.
If it had no adverse effect, I don't think anyone really would care about going through the effort of trying to make a bill and all that.
Yeah. So I'm not going to get into whether it's right or wrong to identify as a furry. I'm not going to get into that. But I will say this, and I see this a lot in schools, and I've experienced this, where our school culture, in an attempt to be supportive for one, has neglected the support of the masses. And in the attempt to be supportive for one, they now mandate, whether it's officially or by practice, mandate others to be acceptive of the few. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want an inclusive environment.
Yep.
But you can't mandate inclusivity by mandating somebody to believe in something or act a certain way that they're not comfortable with.
Yeah, that's not.
It's just those two things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, for sure.
So when we get into this do no harm, we have to look at the balance there. Can we support the activities of one or a few at the same time supporting the beliefs and so forth of the others? And we see this a lot when we start calling people marginalized. The marginalized population, the underserved population. Can we support them while still maintaining the non-marginalized and the non-underserved population? Because what you end up doing, in my opinion, and I'm not a behavioralist, or I am not an expert in early childhood development, but I don't think you can focus on one group or a few individuals without impacting the entire group. I think there's this attempt now, because I believe that politically we've seen a pendulum swing one way, and I think it's starting to swing back at the other way. But I would caution people that we have to strike that balance. We have to have parameters, and we have to be supportive of the individual without impacting the group. Right? Without impacting the others. Because if you force somebody within the larger group to act a certain way to be more supportive of the individual or the few, you're going to get some animosity there.
Yeah.
You're going to get a tilt in the balance of fairness and a tilt in the balance of what are we trying to do here? We're trying to create this positive environment. We're trying to include them. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't try to create understanding. So you go back to the furry issue. We can't force somebody to accept that behavior. We can try to get them to understand the behavior, right? We can get them to try to be more informed about the behavior and why somebody might be doing that. And does that make them a good person or a bad person? I don't know. But we can look to understand. I can't force Ethan to be my friend. Right? I can't force you to be my friend. If you don't like me, you don't like me.
Right? Good if you like kidnap me and
It still doesn't work, right? If you don't like me, you don't like me, right?
Yeah.
Now, I suppose somebody's going to come in and say, well, Stockholm syndrome. They'll start empathizing and sympathizing with their captors and their enemies and start to become supportive. But that's not what we're trying to do here. We're not
Yeah.
trying to create a bunch of kids that are influenced by the Stockholm syndrome. What we are trying to do is create understanding, not necessarily approval, not necessarily you're going to have to be friends with that person, and so forth. But that also being said, on the other side of that, if somebody wants to identify as an animal, it doesn't have any impact on me, right? I don't care. But there are consequences to that. And some of those consequences is there are people who are not going to like you. There are people who are going to think you are strange. So understand that other people are going to have adverse reactions to your choice. And I think that's where we end up looking at a lot of situations, a lot of things that are happening in our society today, is that there seem to be no consequences. I'm being forced because this person identifies this way, or this person shouldn't be held accountable because of their status in society, right? Or what have you. There are very few consequences in our society. A lot less. People are going to argue that there's lots of consequences, but nowhere near as severe or as many as there used to be in life, right? And there's all kinds of reasons for it, and I get it. Consequences are our opportunity as humans, as parts of nature, aspects of nature. Consequences are our opportunity to learn. And if there are no consequences, we don't learn. And you're not going to learn until the consequences are severe, right? So if
I
you
feel
look
that.
at mental health issues on the rise, if you look at addictions that are on the rise, if you look at adverse behaviors that are on the rise, you can look back and say, consequences. Where were the consequences for those kids? The entitlement of some of these kids.
Man, it's like I know. It's funny you say because like I noticed that, and I'm obviously younger than you, so like I feel like you would even like notice it even more.
Right.
You know,
So,
like it's
yeah, because I span a few generations, not just one or two, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, back in the day, we had consequences if we were home late. My mother was friendly to us, but it was a different relationship. She was my mother, not my best friend,
Yeah.
right? And I think that parents, teachers, they try to get along with everybody, and as opposed to setting the parameters. One of the things that you will see, and one of the reasons that I required my children, both of them, to be involved in sports, is because if you don't perform, there's consequences to it. If you're a bad teammate, there's consequences to it. If you are uncoachable, there are consequences to it. If you don't like your coach, there are consequences to that, because that's all translatable to things and aspects of life that you need to be successful in my world.
Right. Yeah, you need to be able to understand, build those skills to manage that.
Right? Yes. And understand that you need to understand how and what it takes to win. We are a win society. You are successful if you are a winner. You are not successful if you are a loser, if you can't win. And if somebody is entitled, and or they don't understand how to win, then they are not desirable employees. They are not going to be successful.
Yeah, no.
The other part of that is they have to understand how to lose, because losing is a consequence of not doing something correctly. And so if you don't learn how to lose and learn from what it is that caused you to lose, then we don't grow.
You're just going to keep losing.
Right. The Navy SEALs have this mantra, this saying, we never lose. We either win or we learn. So if we don't win, most of us would call us losing, but we only lose if we don't learn from it. And if we're never taught, one, about consequences or understanding consequences or how we grow from learning from those consequences, we don't grow. We're kind of stuck. And you see people who, if you, it's all over Instagram, it's all over social media, of all of these kids today, one, that are entitled and they expect somebody to do it for them.
Yeah.
That's
why we have AI now.
Right. But we have adult children who don't know how to cook. So now they're spending.
Hey now. Let's. I'm just really kidding.
Do you cook? Do you know how to cook?
I know how to cook. I'm just not
a cook.
I'm not a cook. I'm not good at it.
But you can survive, right?
Yes.
There are some people who buy a house and never cook a meal in it. And that's been around for a while, right? I don't cook. But why don't you cook, right?
If I never got married, I probably would still be eating a frozen pizza here and there.
Yeah.
I'll admit.
I get it, but
it's just the convenience of it, like, could I make a pizza? Sure. Right. Do I know how to make a pizza? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I want to take the time to actually do it?
But I come from a generation, and this was reality in my house. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and to a single mother who was busy trying to take care of 6 kids, trying to work and so forth. And here, this was never a stated rule, but there were consequences to the actions, right? And that was, if I wanted clean clothes, I washed them. If I wanted to cook, I cooked. If I wanted to eat, I cooked. The biggest rule was, if you asked for dinner, well, what are you cooking? Yeah. And when you said, well, I can do this, how about this? Okay. You had to make enough for everybody. Right? So
man, I would learn to be real quiet.
Or starve for the day, right?
Yeah.
But, so I don't mind cooking, but I grew up now, of course. Here I am, 60 plus years later. I'm not afraid to cook. It's not a big thing for me. I bake. Yeah. I do all kinds of things. I do my own clothes. I rarely go, hey, honey, I need you to do some laundry. If I need laundry, I'll go to the basket and throw it in the machine, right? There are so many things that, if we don't have consequences, that impact the way that we live the rest of our lives. And I will tell you this, and we've talked about this many, many times. Critical thinking and problem solving, there is a direct correlation with somebody's ability to learn from consequences.
Yeah.
I saw a very interesting story on, I think it was Instagram, a couple of days ago. It's this kid, he's probably early teens. I would say 11, 12 years old. Lives in Alaska. He's out in the bush of Alaska it looks like winter, but there's only like 3 months in Alaska that don't look like winter.
Yeah, right.
It's snowy, it's wet, he's miserable. And whether he's out there on a test or he's out there because that's what he likes to do, he has a radio to his dad. And he calls and says, "Hey, can you come help me?" And he's just sort of beaten down. He's cold and so forth. And he said he can't get his fire started, running out of matches. All of these things are going bad and he needs help. And emotionally, he needs help. Dad comes and says, "Okay, let's see what you got here." And he started dissecting the son's situation. And he basically says, you see all this moss on this wood? Yeah. You can't light that stuff. Even when it's dry, you can't light it. It doesn't light. When you came here, your wood was dry, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, now it's all wet. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can slice some of the exterior sides of the woods off to get into where it is dry. Or last night, you could have brought your wood in your tent. So when it started raining, it wouldn't be wet. And you have to take care of your wood. You have to take care of your things that you need to survive. And you can see the kid starting to, his outlook started to improve. And the dad goes, "You know how I learned this?"
By making the same mistakes.
That's exactly what he said.
Yeah.
By not doing what I just told you to do.
Yeah.
This is how I learned. This is how you learn. So now we've learned. We've learned together.
I was going to say, it's like how I learned not to drive around corners too fast.
Yeah. It's because there's consequences to it. Right?
Yeah.
He's in, right? Like replacing your fiberglass fender on your.
That thing was gone.
Right?
I totaled that thing.
But
somehow lived through it. But
that's how we learn. So we have to have consequences. We have to have, if we're going to live in a society where people are capable, people are high functioning, we need them to have consequences when they're young. We need them to learn. So that was a long way to get to probably our topic.
Yeah. So my first question for you is, we were talking before this and you were talking about restorative discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, for those that don't quite understand what that entails, can you give me kind of what that means?
Yeah. So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an expert in this, but there's a few philosophies that are out there that rather than just hammering somebody with detention and suspensions, is that we really should have them work through the problem, right? Work through why what they were doing is not acceptable. Okay. So
this kind of sounds like, hey, I don't want to spank my kids, so we're going to do the restorative discipline method.
Okay.
Is that what this is?
Kind of.
Okay.
So there's this attempt to learn. Here's where it equates more to is positive reinforcement as opposed to negative reinforcement, right?
Okay.
I don't know the statistics on this. Some people are probably going to say this is best thing since sliced bread, and others are going to say there's no evidence that is out there that says this actually works. Here's what I have learned in the short time that I was in a school district. As you know, I have 3 very large dogs.
Yeah. One of them that weighs like more than I do.
Yes. The problem that I had was I got those dogs. I've got all my dogs in a time where it is very much encouraged to use positive reinforcement to train your dogs. Negative reinforcement just creates a bad environment and a bad relationship between you and your dog. Positive reinforcement is centered on getting people and animals to learn from themselves what is expected by reinforcing those positive behaviors. If you try to teach your dog to sit and they don't sit, you don't reinforce that. And when you say sit and then they do sit, you give them a treat. So that's positive reinforcement. You say, good doggy, here's a treat.
Yep.
And eventually they connect the treat to the positive reinforcement. And every time you tell them to sit, they will sit, regardless of whether or not you're giving them a treat.
So what happens when your dog like completely plows into your small child? Do you wait until they're not plowing into your small child and give them a treat?
So here's the story, right? So I'm trying to do all that I can to train my very large dogs. And up until a certain point, I never had really any big issues with training them until I got my most recent two very large dogs, even for me at my size, but understanding my age and my declining mobility and so forth, they're really too big for me.
They're quite large.
And very powerful.
Yeah.
A few years back, we started noticing that those two dogs were too powerful for my wife. And we had a choice, literally. One of them, when we were walking, got distracted and ran after something. I don't even remember what. Ended up breaking my wife's hand.
Broke
it. Mm-hmm.
What?
So we had a choice: get rid of the dog.
Oh my goodness!
Or train it.
Wow.
Right, but the positive training wasn't working. So I did the research, as everyone does, and said, "Hey, how do you stop your dog from pulling? How do you do this?" And I came across a trainer. I think he's from England or Scotland or somewhere over there, who trains large dogs. And one of the first things he says is, if you can use positive reinforcement, use it. But at some point, they got to know who's boss. They got to know that there is the potential for negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
The trick is to understanding when to use it and when not to use it. Which type of reinforcement are you using? And there's a reason I'm going through this long story. If you have balance, then effectively you can use the correct reinforcement for the situation. It's not positive and it's not negative, it's situational. What's the right reinforcement for this behavior? Almost everybody that asks about how I parented. And I'm going to tell you, I wasn't the best parent. I basically had one rule in my house with my kids.
Yes, I think you mentioned this before.
Do you know what it is? Do you remember?
Was it like don't
behave or die?
Yeah, it's something like that. I was gonna say don't be dumb.
Yeah, don't be stupid, right?
Don't do stupid
that's what
things.
I'm saying. But
don't do stupid things.
Yeah, this was crisis communications at its best.
Yeah.
To the point, understood. Everyone understood. But I never had to spank my kids.
Really?
Never.
Wow.
You know why?
No, you got to tell me.
Because they thought I would.
Oh, okay. That's the
right
fear factor.
Well, it's it's the potential for negative impacts.
Yeah.
Negative consequences. So they knew that when both of us as parents, if we said something, we meant it. We took the time to explain things and so forth. We took things away from them. We disciplined them, but it never got to that point because we're like, dude, are you kidding me? What are you thinking? Oh, I know.
the guilt.
And they learn from the behavior. but they learn from the behavior, right?
Yeah.
And when they play sports, I remember very distinctly, my son was so upset. He was pissed that when he was in Little League, the umpire called a strike. And he was adamant, Dad, that was not a strike. And it was the third strike. He sat and watched all three of them. So there were three strikes, but he was pissed. And he was like, this is crap, you know. And I go, dude, what are you doing? And he said, Dad, not one of those were strikes. And I says, what do you mean? He goes, they were way outside, or one was low, one was high, one was inside. I don't remember that whole conversations. And I said, huh, I think all three of them were strikes. And he looked at me because I was standing behind the plate because my son was also a catcher. And I said, all three of those were strikes. And he goes, Dad, they were not. And I said, they were. And I said, you know how I know they were?
Because that's what
The umpire called them.
Yeah.
The umpire called them as strikes. There's nothing you can do about it now. Move on.
Yeah.
Right? So it's accepting what's happening to you and saying, okay, I can't do it. And it's working through that. And if he didn't work hard, he didn't get rewarded for it. He wasn't the most talented. He wasn't the largest at the time. He's a big kid now, but he worked hard. And he worked harder than most of the talented ones who got scholarships or got waivers to go into a Division I school. He had to go through the community college route. And he worked until somebody says, oh, huh. And then he ended up playing Division II or Division I water polo because he worked and people started to recognize that. So that's all I'm saying. It's a long definition of restorative approaches in schools. If you continue not to learn, I'm not going to continue talking to you type result. Because here's what happens. And I've had this happen many times. We can't discipline him because of
this.
And this. We have to go through this process. How many times?
Is there like a legal thing to that?
Not that I'm aware of.
No?
No. Mm-mm.
It's definitely like a sensitive thing, right? Because it's interesting. I don't envy people in that position for sure. It's tough.
There's legal issues at the amount and how you discipline somebody.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. But the amount of attempts, the amount of whatever is, attempts to be positive is obviously, it's not a thing.
But I mean, you're right. Like you were saying earlier that like if you're so concentrated on one person and you're totally ignoring everyone else, I mean, there's no way that's a supportive environment for any of those kids.
Right. But there's also a misunderstanding of the policies. There's a misunderstanding of the law. There's misunderstanding of the administration of those policies and those laws. Right. So I know I've told you this story before, and under this context, we'll explain it again. When I first got to the district, they said, wait until you meet so-and-so. And I said, who's so-and-so? He is undoubtedly the most violent kid we have in our district. And I'm expecting a high school kid.
Yeah.
Third or fourth grader. Big kid, though. I was surprised the first time I met him. He was a special needs kid and had attendants. They called them paralegal or para-educators there, handlers, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
He was identified as the most violent kid, and he's 10 years old, 11 years old. And I said, wait, why is that a thing? There's other issues going on if you are identifying a 10-year-old kid as the most violent. Why is he in the school district? We have to. Why? Because. And so over the next couple of years, I dealt quite often with this young man, this child, and I get calls from the school. He's violent again. He's throwing chairs. He's running around threatening people. And I said, okay, what's the deal here? And I went to my boss and I said, look, we got to put a stop to this. Well, Kelly, you don't understand. I says, okay, let's work through this. And she tells me that, he's got this IEP 504, whatever he was actually on. I think it was an IEP. And we have to deal with this. And I says, at the expense of everyone else. And a light bulb you could see. Like, what do you mean? I says, there's no law that says that everyone else has to be subjected to this kid's violence.
Mm.
We have to do something. You're having difficulty hiring people who are, one, willing, and two, capable of dealing with this child. But you don't understand. I says, I do understand.
Yeah, it's like what happens when he gets to high school and the kid just
Right?
gets bigger and bigger and never
Right?
learns
This
anything.
kid, literally, this kid, his stated goal in life was to become the head of the Mexican mafia.
Oh, it's this same kid.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Right? At 10 years old, 11 years old, this is his lifelong goal. And you just said, yeah, and he was doing stuff and, there was no consequences for him. I would take that to court every time. There is no law that is going to protect this kid over this entire school, that you have to let him just do whatever he wants to do. There's no law that's going to do that. Right? It's a misunderstanding of the administration of that law. And there are other places for them.
Aren't there some schools that have like...
That's what they do.
They
deal with violent kids.
Yeah, but I mean, don't they have like a different... I might be totally wrong. Don't they have like a different schedule or something that like they're not even in the same classrooms as...
So this kid was in a class by himself.
Oh, so he was just violent towards the teacher.
He was violent towards whoever was teaching him at that time.
Oh, man.
And sometimes they would have other kids come in. As long as he was okay, then it worked. But if he didn't like what was happening, he would start throwing stuff. And, one time it was getting out of hand and he was physically assaulted the teacher and the paraeducator and was throwing stuff and screaming and threatening. And I got called to go over and they said, hey, Kelly, can you go sit with him? And I said, yeah, certainly. And
oh, boy.
So he came in and, first things out of his mouth was, what are you going to do? I looked at him and I says, let me explain something to you, dude.
Oh, man. And this is after your like law enforcement experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I want to just paint that picture.
Yeah. I said, here's the deal. I'm here to make sure you don't do anything bad. And he goes, how are you going to stop me? I looked at him and I said, and I have to say this because this is going out over the air.
Yeah.
I said, I am going to make sure that you don't in ways that you have never felt before. And he looked at me. I said, let me say this way. I said, I threatened him with physical violence. And he looked at me, you can't do that. And I said, maybe not. But I know my rights to protect myself.
That's true.
And I will use all means necessary to protect myself. You are not going to get out of this room.
Oh, man. Like if you only knew like the stuff you dealt with before that.
Right.
Like...
But and he sat down and we had a conversation. He calmed down. He was eventually arrested, taken to juvenile hall. Wow. He got out and released to his mother. He was back in school the next couple of days or whatever. They suspended him or what have you. But they allowed that to happen over time because there were no questions, no consequences. I was going to say they misunderstood the administration of that law or they were afraid to test it. The whole point of this is we have to get it to a point where there's balance. We have to get to a point where all of our kids are treated with respect and so forth. But we can't treat one group at the expense of another group. That's not the intent of the law. The fact is there's no law that says you have to accept somebody. I don't have to like you. I don't have to. You can try, but if I don't like you, I don't like you. There's nothing you're going to do to change that. It's me who has to change. Are you going to try to change me? Sure. You can explain why it's important that I change or grow or whatever you want to say. But if there's nothing you can do to force me to become your friend, either I like you or I don't like you. I can tolerate you. Knowing that, there were many times where, as a supervisor, as a manager, I had people who didn't get along on a shift.
Like two people below you?
Yep.
Yeah.
There was more than one time I had to give the sandbox speech to adults carrying firearms.
Jeez.
Right? Get in here. We're going to have the sandbox speech. But Sarge, get in there. Let's go. I don't care if you guys like each other. I do not care. But while you are here in my sandbox, you're going to play nicely with each other.
Yeah.
You are going to support each other. If somebody calls for help, you're going to go. If somebody's drowning in reports, you're going to go help. You're going to support each other. You're going to get through this shift being nice to each other. You don't have to like each other. You go your separate ways. I don't care. You don't have to go out and have drinks together. You don't have to have each other over to the other's house for a barbecue. You don't have to. But you need to get along. And you need to be cordial and you need to support each other while you're here. It's that simple. That's what we need to do. We need to strike that balance. And we need people to feel valued, but not at the expense of somebody else. You can't demarginalize a group while demarginalizing another group. That makes sense. Whatever that means to you.
I think we're gonna have to dive into this deeper at some point.
Sure.
I feel like there's so much to this. And
yeah, here's when I look at many things that we've talked about. Army teachers doing different things that are controversial. I'm not here to say don't do this or don't do that. Here's what I am saying. You have to look at it with a critical eye. You have to understand what you are doing. I have heard anecdotally, and I asked you to do the research, and I don't know that we ever came up with an answer here, but is the restorative approach to discipline, is that effective? I don't know. Has discipline gone down? You could argue that it is, because you're not subjecting them to what is defined as discipline, right? If suspensions and expulsions have gone down and that was your goal, okay, success. But if you're really trying to influence the type of behavior and correct that behavior by doing this, are you successful? That's the type of stuff that you have to do. And if you're going to change the entire educational institution's approach to discipline, you better make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. And if your goal is, or you make this assumption that lower discipline is better, and you're going to define that as your success, I would say you might want to re-examine that. Because look at the things that have, since the restorative approach has been implemented, look at the things that we're now talking about. Mental health issues, anxiety, violence increasing, isolation of kids. Sure, we're going to blame that all on social media, right?
Like it plays a part, but it's not the sole thing.
That's right. That's right. There's other factors here.
Yeah, definitely. Right? The internet has definitely played a big.
Sure. It's had a huge impact, but maybe so has the restorative approach. I don't know, but you should ask that question. You should find the answer to that question.
When you leave behavior totally unchecked, it's at the will of. That's how I look at it, anyways. But
yeah, you're totally right. So we talked about this a little bit, I think on the last podcast, I'm not 100%. There was a study done in Illinois, and the study asked the teachers, what's your number one concern? And I don't know the construct of the question,
whether it was
but
like open, or if they had
choices,
multiple choice or something.
Yeah. I don't know what the whole idea or how that was actually constructed, because as we know, surveys are largely dependent on the questions you ask and how you ask those questions.
Yep.
But the number one concern for teachers in Illinois, school safety. When we talked to other people about that, they said, well, it's not really the safety. It's our teachers feel safe, but there's an issue with classroom management. There's an issue with these other components. And so they've put all of these things into silos that all impact school safety and feeling safe. The reality is that people aren't safe. I can never guarantee your safety, ever, right? That's the reality. I can't say, you've done everything that you possibly could do, now you are safe.
Now you're safe. Nothing ever bad's could ever happen to you.
But you can say, in general, I'm safe because I feel safe. Safety is self-defined. It's defined by the individual. There are things that I would do and have done because I felt safe doing them. As you know, I was a scuba diver for a long time. Why? Because I felt safe doing it. There are lots of people out there that no matter what you do, will never feel safe going into the ocean. Right? Even on a boat.
Yeah.
Right? So when we take that context, is we have to get people to feel safe. And if they don't feel safe because of things that we are doing, we're losing control in the classroom. Is it unsafe in there? Probably not. But it's out of control. It's chaos. It's overstimulating many of the people in there, and they don't feel safe.
Pretty hard to learn in that environment too.
That's right. And here's one of the components of safety is that one of two things is occurring. Either you control your environment or you trust somebody else to control your environment. So if you're in a class that doesn't have control, the teacher doesn't have control over the class, and the students are running amok in the class, I don't control that. As a student, I don't have any authority or any power to make the other students sit down and do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, you're looking to the teacher in that classroom to manage that.
If they're not, then the person I trust to control my safety is not there.
Yeah.
So why is that not there? Is because they see that there is this approach that has no consequences to it. So they take that as leadership not supporting them. If they can't control it, they expect their leadership to control it. There's no discipline, no power to control. Leadership doesn't support me when I try to. They go talk to them, and then kids back in my class the next day doing the same thing, and they're saying, see, look at what you tried to, you sent me to the principal's office. The principal said, don't do this anymore. Okay.
Off you go.
Right? And I will tell you how this directly impacts safety. One of the methods out there for conducting threat assessments, have you ask a series of questions in an attempt to determine whether the subject of your assessment is just angry and making this idle threat, or is actually posing a threat. So there's a difference between making a threat and posing a threat. If somebody poses a threat, that means there's some likelihood that that's going to happen. The difference between saying, I'm going to kill you versus I'm going to kill you, and this is how I'm going to kill you, and these are the weapons I've amassed, this is my route, and so forth, right?
Yeah. A little more premeditated.
Somebody got angry and said, I'm going to kill you, and didn't mean it in that context. They just were making this sort of idle threat. But one of those questions or one of those recommended actions is to say this or ask this. Did you really mean it? And if the subject says, no, I didn't really mean it, I was just playing, I'm sorry, I'll write an apology saying I didn't mean it. The result of that response is that it was an idle threat and not an actual threat. It didn't pose any danger to anybody. So if that's the case, wouldn't it be beneficial to the child who actually poses a threat to say, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was just joking. I was angry. I'm not angry anymore. I'm over it. I get it. I'm not supposed to do it.
Wait. Are you telling me that a kid would lie
for their own benefit?
No.
To manipulate, to remove the pressure? I'm not telling you that at all. I'm not a child psychologist.
That can't be a thing.
Right?
Children always tell the truth.
Right? And so when you sit there and you go, wait a second, now we understand why there is this disconnect between people understanding that there's a threat or not and the communication thereof. Just because a child says, nah, I didn't mean it, I was joking, doesn't mean that they didn't actually pose a threat. You still have to do the investigation. You have to independently determine whether or not that kid poses a threat and where they are in that process. If you can put them on the pathway to violence, they pose a threat. Now you have to get them off that, right? So some of our practices are saying, well, if he apologizes, that's not a threat. That was just an idle comment, and that's not the way it is. And where do you think they learned that behavior? Where do you think that was reinforced? Every time the teacher said, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that, they send them to the principal, and the principal says, hey, you got to stop doing that. Okay.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. All right. I'll stop.
Hey, look at this is the 14th time this week you've been in my office. Why are you still coming here? Stop doing it. Okay. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it. I was just joking.
Yeah, it's gotta be some consequences.
Here's the other part of that is in order for consequences to be effective, we have to have support bilateral. I'm going to call it bilateral support because I don't know what else to call it, between the schools and the parents.
For sure.
We have a society where little Johnny can do no wrong. Little Susie can do no wrong. And we got to get away from that. But why do we have that? Is because we've been doing non-consequential discipline for many, many years now. It's even gone into our criminal justice system where they are decriminalizing things, not because it was a bad law, but because there's this perception that the laws were not administered equally. So rather than change the behavior, we change the law. We change the approach.
It's like you do something so bad, like you go and murder somebody or something like that, and it's like, oh, you just plead that you're mentally insane, then you get it's like you get a lesser sentence.
Yeah,
like you see that. Maybe not on that in that case, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
you see it a lot.
I'll say it this way: in California, there is a big push to reduce the population in state prison. The justification for doing that was the ethnic makeup of the prisoners, not the fact whether they did or didn't do the crime, but because of a demographic.
So because there's so many of the same
whatever
person,
a certain percentage of the jail population exceeds the population, the percentage
you
of the
get
population.
You get a lesser sentence because,
or you get released early.
That's crazy.
Or here, we're going to push your custody from the state prison system back to the counties because this was a hardship on your family. Your actions shouldn't impact your family from going there, right? Here's the reality.
That's wild.
And I talk to people that are not in the criminal justice. Do you know how hard it is to actually get somebody sentenced and housed in state prison?
I don't.
It is rarely a first offense. It is multiple attempts, suspended sentences, probation, reduced sentences, all of these things that are, and finally a judge comes in and says, okay, I'm done dealing with you. You're going to state prison this time.
What if they did something really bad right off the rip?
Those are the rare occasions, right?
Okay.
All right. But generally people, first of all, don't get caught the first time.
Yeah.
Right?
I believe
it. And generally the reality says that they don't get sent to state prison unless it's something super egregious. The murder, the whatever.
Yep.
There was and still is this big movement do criminal justice reform. We hear it all the time. The Criminal Justice Reform Act of whatever, for whatever. We need to reform the criminal justice system. It's funny how many of those people that are screaming for criminal justice reform for major crimes that have a huge detrimental impact on society start screaming about putting people in jail when it doesn't follow their political agenda. We need to, wait a second, what about this? Remember several years ago when this was happening? You were applauding that, but it happened to you. Now you want everyone to serve life sentences. So let's figure it out.
Figure it out.
Figure it out.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.